What's up, guys? Welcome back. I know it's been a minute, but we are getting into finishing up the custom e-bike that I was building, and you guys may have seen some of this footage already because of prior episodes that I did. I went ahead and I combined them all into one really long video because those seem to do better. I don't really know why. But here I am mocking up the frame. If you guys remember, I did have a picture of this already drawn out, and I kind of veered away from that a little bit just because of the way the picture was drawn. There were some things I couldn't do. So you can even see here I was having a few issues on getting the design down onto the table so that it would look correct. Just getting the seat post aligned and where that's going to actually sit, because you'll see later in the video we do run a bobber seat with an airbag to it. Just wanted to make sure that it had enough support underneath it and the bracket was going to fit where it was supposed to fit. Here we're just running the bottom bracket. We did use a smaller bottom bracket. It's thinner, it's pre-threaded, and it's made for things like mid-drives or wide bottom bracket situations. Here we're just running our down tube, figuring out where that needs to go. And again, had to redo the seat tube again because it just wasn't sitting where I wanted it to. It needed to be a little higher than normal. And again, for you guys building frames, you can see here this part that I'm cutting off is the amount of metal that you lose because of the bender. Now we're going to get ready to tube notch. I like to kind of set my metal down to see where it's going to be, get the tube notching ready. We slide it into the tube notcher, and we use our all-time favorite lubrication, Anchor Lube. Guys, if you like to help to support the channel, please click the link in the description and show Anchor Lube some love. Also, if you're on the Instagrammer, they're on there too. They're trying to grow. Help them out. They are a small business, but this stuff is amazing. Like, I cannot say it enough how good this stuff helps my bits lifespan, as well as just cutting the material in general. It's just easier. You guys don't have to use as much as I do. I kind of just do this because it gets awry on social media where people just like to ask me why I'm using so much, so I just use more. It's just for fun, but you really don't need to use this much. It does come in a tube, and you can buy them in a bucket. You can buy it however you want to off the Amazon, but it works amazing. Look at the fit up on this from this tube notching. I didn't even grind anything clean yet. I just slid it right up in there, and it fit. Love that. That's a difficult part. Getting these two to connect together can be hard, so take your time. You don't really want any gaps here just because this is where the seat's going to be pulling from. So try to get this as close as you can. I was also TIG welding that part, so I wanted it to be what kind of basically has to be perfect if you're going to be TIG welding. I'm going in here. What I'm doing with the grinder right there is just rolling it around the grinder, giving myself a little bit of a bevel. So when I do go in there to weld, that TIG weld can actually sit down inside of that bevel. Just a little cheat code tech tip for you. And there you go. As you can see, beautiful. Right here we get to do it again. We need to make this also fit up perfectly because, again, it's what's basically holding the back of the bike together. Later on I'll probably tube notch in between that, and that's where my seat stays are going to go. But as of right now, I need to make sure that this has a perfect fitment. You can kind of see in the drawing here of how that needs to fit up, and bam, it fits. Alright, it's time to get a little bit of bending work done. I did have to swap out these 1-inch dies for my 1.5-inch dies. That's so that I can get the lower tube bent at that small angle that I need so that it goes up to the bottom bracket. And for clarification, guys, this is a Woodward Fab tubing bender. I get a lot of questions, and it seems quite popular when I make a video of these on Instagram or YouTube, and people are like, what is that? What's that tool? Did you make it? No, I didn't make it. These tools have been around forever. It's pretty simple. You can actually pick up one of these or something like it through Eastwood Company, and you can use my discount code CBERK10. Put it up on the screen right now. Use that code. You guys can get a bender from them. They all work the same. This bender is actually not amazing. It does kink the metal a little bit. It's not aligned very well. There are higher dollar machines that work way better. Also, don't be scared to just lay the lube on, because the more lube you lay in here, the easier it's going to slide and the less scarring of the metal it's going to do. Sometimes these dies will dig into the metal as you're bending and kind of start to lift some of the metal off, and you got to grind that later. But it does the trick. Alright, here I like to set my bottom bracket on the table. That's what I'm doing here before I tube notch it. I want to go ahead and get these together. I'll weld these two together, and then that's where I'll run my tube notcher through the area that I welded. That way it keeps everything together. Here we're just working on the back of the bike, getting that tube in. This is probably one of the more difficult tubes to do because it's such a massive angle to try to cut from, and then try to make sure that you're getting the top and bottom connected. I would like to find another way to cut these angles, just because they are so steep that you take a chance of the grinding wheel getting caught in these, and that's what shreds them apart. Kind of dangerous. Now, I know I said I am TIG welding this frame together, but I need to get it all quickly MIG welded down while it's sitting on the table nice and flat. So I'm just laying tacks in certain areas. I'll come back later, grind those down, and then I can TIG weld over all of that stuff. There you go, breaking out the TIG welder, and again, I'm trying to get as much done while it's laying flat on the table as I can. It just makes it easier for me. I have a hard time seeing as it is. Getting older, after 40 years old, you start to lose your nearsightedness. But as much as I can do on the table, I want to. I'm still a beginning TIG welder, and it just makes it a whole lot easier for me if I can do it while everything's laying flat, instead of in the air where you're trying to adjust the pedal and your hand and your movements and all that. Here I just laid a 29-inch tube. I just kind of wanted to get an idea how low did I want this frame. I did want it super low to the ground, and that's exactly what I got. Time to work on the tank bar. I did want to run the battery inside of the tank so it's out of the way, so I needed to make a certain tank bar that would accommodate the battery, and later you'll see we're actually going to make a tank for it. I do also get asked a lot about the tubing notcher that I'm using here. This is from a company called Chicago Brand Tools, not to be confused with Harbor Freight Chicago brand, whatever they're called. Not the same company. I will list an Amazon link in the description also if that's something you guys are interested in. It's not sponsored by any means, but I have been using this tube notcher now for almost 7 years, and it saves so much time. Alright, right here we're getting ready to put the bottom bracket hole in, and like I said, I don't know that I could even do this without this tubing notcher. It's so precise. I'm able to stick it in there at any angle and get the perfect cut through. Throwing some anchor lube on there because it's basically a necessity now to use your anchor lube and get everything ready to start drilling that hole. Alright, here we're just putting holes in the frame so that we can insert the chain stays. That is how I like to build my frames, is I put a hole in the frame, that way the chain stays go right in, and they'll be the same on both sides, because as long as you're cutting it straight here, it doesn't have a choice but to be straight when you're sliding them in. And it just makes, in my opinion, the frame stronger. And guys, I do get asked about my jig quite a bit. This jig is from Chop Source. They make jigs for motorcycles, then they decided that they would make them for bicycles as well. Basically, you're going to pick up all the bracketry from them, and then they will give you the directions on the metal that you need to go down to your local metal supply store and pick up the material that you need, and everything should just bolt right together. Right here, we're just tigging the bottom bracket on. I wanted to tig, like I said, as much as I possibly could on this frame. I'm keeping this. This is going to be my rider because I have bad knees and was really looking for something in the electric area where I could ride if I needed to, but then didn't need to pedal if my knees were hurting. So I am going to be keeping this one. And I figured, you know what, if I'm keeping it and I TIG weld the entire frame and something fails, at least it's on me. Here we're just bending up those upper seat stays. I needed to get two 90-degree bends, so I did one, then I did the other. That's what's going to slide into the frame. I needed to make a small little notch later on, but right here I needed to know exactly where I was going, figure out what it needed to be cut, because that's what's going to go in the frame, and then take it over to the tubing bender again and give it a small kick so that it could go down and then back up like you see here. Gave it just a small little, maybe 30-degree bend up to get it to where it lined up with the... I wanted it to line with the frame a little bit, but I also wanted it to make sure it lined up with the top of the dropouts. Here's where I clamp everything in, make sure everything is even from both sides, and I'm going to go ahead and make my caps. I try to draw this to where it's in the same line as my dropout, so that when I put the cap on from side to side, it looks the same. Alright, it's all capped off, ready to locate everything in its final position. I'm going to go ahead and tack weld that on there just to make sure nothing can move on each side. I will MIG weld the dropouts on just because it's such a thick material that I've tried to TIG weld it before, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not proficient enough to do it correctly, so I don't want that to fail. So I know how to MIG weld that. I went ahead and that's what I did. Here I'm just checking measurements from each side of the upper seat stays to make sure that they are both exactly the same distance on each side. You have some movement before you tack weld that into the frame that you can move this back and forth. Alright, tossed in my 1-inch dies because here I need a pretty significant bend in order to do the lower chain stays that I want to do. I basically need to bend this into a big U. Now the issue that you run into with a bender is once you have bent the metal this way, you cannot stick it into your mandrel bender in order to get this 90-degree bend. So what I did was I grabbed a piece of scrap that I had, went ahead and bent that into a 90, and then figured out where I can connect the two together. I did go ahead and pick up some tubing that actually would fit inside of these 1-inch .065 pieces, as you can see here, and I went ahead and plug welded the top and bottom of it so that it would be structurally sound, and I knew I wasn't going to run into any issues. Alright, getting it TIG welded exactly where I wanted it to go, and I can tell you, I actually love how these chainstays came out. Way past my expectations of how they were going to come out. I was worried that when I put the two pieces together, you were going to be able to see where I had welded it, but once I ground all this down and the way that it formed, and because that tubing on the inside fits so well, it almost made it like a glove, and it squeezed together, and I didn't have any problems, and you really can't even tell that these were two pieces. Alright guys, it is tank time. I am doing this out of some 18 gauge steel just because I wanted it to be, I didn't want some like really heavy metal there up in the upper part of the tank, so I picked up the 18 gauge. I'm using the cardboard to make a template, kind of right here, just seeing where I want to put this battery. A lot of people asking me why I chose this battery, mainly because of its size. I have a buddy that uses one. He uses it quite often and has never had an issue with it. So having it such a small battery with so much power is kind of what I was looking for. Keep everything compact. I may regret that later, but as of right now, it works. I'm going to try to make the tank out of as one piece, basically, as much as I possibly can. Just using these cardboard templates, I'll tape it down to another piece just to make it longer so that I can put this into the frame and figure out where I need to bend it. I didn't want to have to weld a whole bunch of stuff together, and then with this really thin metal, it likes to warp. I mean, there really isn't much you can do when you're welding stuff this thin, if you're, unless you really take your time. But I was able to make the entire bottom section out of one piece, and then the entire top section I was able to also make out of one piece. One thing I do not have in the shop is a brake, so this kind of it's a little easier to do when you're doing only 18 gauge, but I think if you started to step it up to anything thicker, this wouldn't be so easy, especially because this table's on wheels, but I was able to get out of it what I needed to. Alright, these are the brackets that will be holding the tank to the frame. I wanted them to bolt from underneath. I didn't want there to be any hardware showing. I kind of wanted the tank to look like it was floating, so that's how I made these brackets. And then you nutsert the bottom of the tank, and then it just bolts from underneath. Super simple. Alright, all I'm doing here is making the top part of the tank. I want it to have the same bend as the backbone, so that's what I'm doing on this part. Alright, I'm laying the metal up in there. Now I'm going to use these clamps to kind of form the metal to the backbone so it's the same shape. The only thing I think I probably kind of messed up here was by doing this, I now caused the metal to be so close to the tank area that when I went to go pull it in and out, it was a little too tight. And I knew that that could probably be an issue later on when it came time to do powder coat. This stuff was hard to weld. For a novice like me, trying to weld 18 gauge steel is not easy. You just start blowing holes through it. It starts to warp really bad. So I did try to jump around as much as I could, and it came out pretty clean, but I had to be careful that I didn't, just grinding alone, that I didn't start burning through the metal. So here I not only wanted to give the tank more structure, I wanted to have some more mounting areas for me to mount the tank plates to, because the plates are actually going to be removable from the side of the tank. So that's what I did here. I cut these tabs, I just gave them a little tack weld from the inside, come back and weld that up later nice and smooth. But it was able to give me some more areas to throw some riv nuts in there that will allow me to put the tank plate on. Alright, on to the fun part. This is where I'm going to go ahead and start making some tank plates that are going to go on the outside and actually bolt to this tank. I'm going to do it out of some thicker gauged aluminum because of the way I wanted to make kind of a shroud that would go around some bead rolled aluminum. And I did end up changing that later. I kind of scratched it just because I wasn't really digging the look of it with this bike, but it was a lot of good practice and I had fun. I'm just laying the tank plates down, I'm clamping them because I need to figure out where I want to do the holes. I want them a certain distance from the outside of the aluminum. That way, because like I said, this ends up being a shroud. We end up cutting the inside of this aluminum out. This is just like a lip. If you guys have never used rib nuts, please go to Amazon. I'll find some and I'll link it in the description for you because these things are lifesavers. We didn't have these back when I used to build cars and other stuff that I did, and the amount of time this saves you from drilling a hole, welding a nut, and then hoping that that nut doesn't break on the other side. These things are an amazing lifesaver, and hats off to the man that invented them, or woman, I don't know. Alright guys, and here's where I kind of screwed up a little bit. Not majorly, but I wanted the battery to float. I don't know why. I could have just stuck it in there, called it a day, but for some odd reason I wanted it to have its own battery tray and I wanted it to float in there. Well, by doing all of this, and again, it being such thin metal, I started to warp the tank. I used some 16 gauge square tubing as kind of like perch legs, and then I used some more 18 gauge steel as a top plate, or I believe it was 16 gauge steel as a top plate. But by doing this and then welding this to the tank, it actually started to warp it. So when I went to go put those tank plates, the side plates back on, they weren't lining up real well, and getting the tank in and out of the frame seemed to be a little bit more difficult. So we had to put some hammer and dolly work into it in order for it to fit. I will say I kind of like how the battery floated, and with the case that the battery came in, I was actually able to strap the battery around the perch, which keeps it nice, safe, and it doesn't move. Alright, on to the fun part. We're going to try to cut the center out of this aluminum without screwing it up. I don't have an air saw, so I did have to use a grinder, which kind of got a little sketchy, especially around some of these corners. I was worried I was going to nick them, because once you've nicked aluminum, if you can't weld it back up, it's scarred. And if you can't sand it down because you nicked it too much, you get to start over. So luckily I didn't. I was able to do exactly what I needed. I could go in there with my die grinder and clean it all up and make it nice. Alright, it's time to make the center section of this tank, and we're using some .035 aluminum. I believe it's super thin. It's really easy to bead roll because it's so much thinner, and I really wanted to have fun with it, so we're going to do pleats. So pleats are basically like a diamond. I don't know if you've seen car upholstery or some car interior where they go in there and they make these diamonds, and the diamonds kind of poof out. So in my head, I thought, well, if I do this to metal and then I stick the shroud around those diamonds should protrude past the shroud. Well, turns out when you're doing it on metal, it actually makes it start to sink inward. So I did go in with a step die around the diamonds to try to get them to kind of, for the better word, poof out. But it just didn't get out enough to my liking. I also later on decided that this was not really for this bike, and we did some changes. But it was fun anyway, and here we are getting ready to make those diamonds. This is using my Eastwood 24-inch bead roller. Again, guys, if you want to pick up anything from Eastwood, it does help support the channel. Use my code CBERT10, and I will put the link in the description below, where you guys can get a 10% off discount on anything on their website. Alright, right here I'm using that stepping die around, and then you can kind of see once I lay this over it, it does it. It just doesn't do it enough. In my head, I thought that I could get it to really pop out more, but the more that you bead roll this metal, especially stuff this thin, the more that it warps, and eventually it's just a big potato chip. Not enough tank talk. On this bike, I did want to make sure that I had plenty of support, so I did weld these brackets right to the bottom bracket because of how wide the bottom bracket and how long it stuck out. I wanted to make sure that that was going to be nice and supported. This fork leg here is a Lawless fork leg. I ended up not using these because I ended up having to add brakes later on, as you can see, but I did want the fork to angle cut with the dropout bracket. You can order it this way from Lawless. I didn't. It's a little cheaper if you don't. I knew because I can fab it myself, so no big deal. But if you do want to and you don't have the ability to fab this up, you can order it already pre-cut this way so that it has an angle cut instead of it being chopped off at the bottom and having a squared off tube. Alright guys, this right here is a plastic fender I picked up. The metal fender was just way too heavy, so this was a plastic one, which we are going to do a forged carbon fiber overlay on there. You can get these fenders off of Amazon. They're around $120 to $150, but definitely worth it as far as weight savings over the metal fender. We're just going to do a carbon fiber overlay with some resin. This was my first time doing it. It didn't turn out perfect. I definitely know some things I would like to do differently next time. but it came out pretty good. It is a lot of work. It's a lot of applying resin, applying carbon, and then sanding, and then applying more resin and sanding. And it's a lot of that over and over again. So if you, like me, and you don't have a whole lot of patience, this might not be for you. But definitely could have took my time a little bit more. Made sure I probably could have sanded it about 3 or 4 more times, and then kept laying the resin. But gotta get the project done. And guys, right here, this is a longtime sponsor of mine, Golden Motors. This is where I picked up the CYC mid-drive for this build. Guys, go over there and check them out. Follow their YouTube channel, which I will link in the description below, as well as their website. They did my e-scooter with me. They were the first person I went to when it was time to do this build here, and with no questions whatsoever, they jumped on board. I was pleasantly surprised by how light this motor is, like unbelievably light. Compared to a Bafang motor that was the first motor I had ever touched before. It was very surprising as far as the difference in weight on these two, and that's kind of what I was going for. I was trying to make this, what is an already heavy frame, as light as possible. Just kind of going through all the stuff that came in. You get the motor, you get the gearing, you get the crank, everything you need. There's different style crank arms or different size crank arms, as well as different sprocket sizes. And all the directions are super easy to follow. You can even go on Golden Motors YouTube page, and they even show you how to install this thing, which I had to go to twice. So big help on that. I don't feel like this was complicated to put together. It's probably no different than any other crank setup that you're using or anything like that. There's just a motor now. Now, something I learned later on, you want to be super careful with these little plugs right here, because there's just these little teeny pins inside of there, and if you bend them, well, yeah, let's say I bent them. Again, guys, if you're looking for this exact same setup, click the link in the description to Golden Motors and let them know I sent you. Alright, the only thing different with using this battery is I did have to get some different type of connectors. Right here I'm just stripping wires. I'm just mocking everything up to get it ready to go. I eventually ended up shortening all these wires, but for right now, I just wanted to see it move. kind of freaked me out there for a second as it took off, but it went so easy. It actually just, as soon as you hit the throttle, it punched it, and it kind of caught me off guard. I wasn't quite ready because I'd never used one of these before. But here you can see all you do is you grab a hold of the crank and the wheel just spins on its own. I did kind of realize here that my coaster brake wasn't going to work. Now, like I like to use on most of my builds is a Lawless triple tree fork. Whether I'm using the fork legs from him or I'm using the actual triple tree itself, they're so well made. They're made out of billet aluminum. They're all made in the US, and I will also link him in the description below if you guys want to check out any of his stuff. I used the pedals in this. I used the shifter as well as the fork setup in this, and he makes a whole lot more. I'm not normally a big ape hanger guy, but these are mini apes, and I felt they kind of flowed with the frame. Usually that's my biggest issue, is trying to figure out what bars really fit with the frame. Here, just test fitting it, seeing exactly where I want it. There is no air in the seat right now, so it just dumped right down, but the airbag seat's pretty nice. Alright, it's time to get the headlight together. I wanted to get it all bolted up, make sure it all worked before we start laying the carbon on there. Gonna go ahead and sand it down with some 80 grit so that I can make sure the resin's going to stick. This is like my 4th or 5th time sanding the resin on the fender, and it started to look a lot better. Here we're just laying the resin down. You lay the resin down first, you wait till it starts to tack up, and then you can start applying the forged carbon overlay onto that. And then the last time here, I wanted to get a nice thick coat of resin over the fender, and I could really start seeing it look right, because to get to this point, it looked like I messed up. Now here's what it looks like when you first lay the first amount of carbon down. You want it as flat as possible, and then here it is once again after you add one coat. It's super bumpy, it doesn't look right, but here's the finished product on the fender once that was done. It probably could have used another sanding and another coat, but I was done. Here's some cardboard CAD design brackets that I need to do to make the fender, which I just made these little brackets out of some 16 gauge steel I had laying around. They didn't need to be super thick because it's just holding up a plastic fender. If it was a metal fender, I probably would have went with something a little thicker, but these worked out just fine. I can't do nothing with you. Did go ahead and put rib nuts into the fender, and that's how they're held through the brackets that I just TIG welded to the frame. Every bolt on the frame that I'm using is stainless steel, and I got some black beauty washers off of Amazon. I wasn't 100% sure where I was going to put my post or if I was even going to use one, and luckily Lawless has a shifter post. If you don't have the ability to weld a post to your frame, or you don't know where you want to put it, you can pick up one of these shifter posts off his website, and while you're ordering the shifter, have it all shipped at one time. Something I didn't take into consideration when I was doing this was how I was going to mount this little 3-speed Nexus mechanism here. Luckily I was able just to put it around, turn it up, and it worked. I did pick up some BMX chain tensioners, which I had just enough room to slide those on the inside and be able to give me plenty of tension on the chain. Because a big worry with one of these is that that chain slips off and it gets caught up in that mid-drive, and you can run into some pretty big problems. I ended up picking up some of these aluminum headlight brackets off Amazon as well, and they worked pretty good, other than they just weren't round enough, and I ended up needing to go in there with my die grinder and just grinding them out, which isn't fun when you're trying to grind aluminum, but they ended up working and they look really cool, so we ran with it. Alright, time for a final wet sand on the fender, and then that way I could run an automotive clear coat over it. Being that it's going to be out in the sun when we're riding or doing whatever, I wanted some protection. So I just went over it. I started off with a 600 grit, and then I worked my way all the way up to 2000. And here's the first modification I needed to make to the tank, and when I put the tank in I realized I had very little turning radius, probably as much as a motorcycle. That doesn't work with a bike. So what I'm doing here is I'm cutting the fronts off and I'm putting them at an angle so that I'll have more turning room, where before my forks would just smack the tank. Here you can see we changed up the tank plates. I wanted something a little more hot rod. I felt like the diamonds just didn't fit the frame real well, and whatever, I got to practice more. Alright, time for final assembly on the headlight, which it looks pretty cool. Super happy. I do have a video, guys, if you ever want to learn how to build a headlight. I do it pretty simple. There are guys out there like Big Head Customs who can make you some pretty killer lights. So these are just basic lights. I'm nothing serious. Alright guys, here's where I decided I was going to run a front disc. Figured out that the coaster brake doesn't work with a mid-drive, so I had to go back to Chuck Wheels, and he made me a wheel with a disc brake hub. I'm only going to run a front brake on this, but I am running a hydro, so it's way stronger. And this was the first time I'd ever ran a hydro, and I really don't know a whole lot even about your standard hand brakes. Usually I run coasters on everything I do. So I ran into a few issues here just trying to get this to work. Alright, mock-up number 904. We ended up making new fork legs for this because I needed a bracket to hold the disc brake caliper. Here I'm putting it on the left side, which is normally what you do, and I did order a front brake. Well, finding out that the front brake wouldn't bolt to this at all. I couldn't get it, no matter where I flipped it, no matter how I turned it, I could not get it to bolt on. So I had to improvise a little bit, which you'll see later.
Alright guys, so a couple things I keep running into with doing the brake setup here is that where the bracket is, I'll explain what I've done here in a second, but where the bracket is on here, it doesn't allow the disc, or it doesn't allow the caliper to sit correctly when it's on the other side of this. So what I did was I flipped the wheel, I flipped the brake disc so that it is going the proper direction, and I moved the brake over to the right side opposed to the left side where most of them are. Now that is going to cause me to have the handle up here by the trigger, by the throttle, but that's okay. I don't think that's going to be much of an issue. And I did go ahead and I picked up another caliper that's actually for the rear, so it brings it to the back, it puts it on this side of the wheel, and it gives me extra length too, because I really didn't have enough. And I tried to go through a couple different calipers. I really want to run a hydraulic system. I don't want to run a cable, just because this is my only brake. So that's kind of what I'm doing. I wanted to interrupt kind of show you why I was having such an issue. I've ordered like 3 different calipers now, but let's test fit this one and see where it goes.
I'm just doing mock-up here, but I did end up taking the extra caliper that I had and I removed the handle so that I could stick it on the left side and I wouldn't have so much going on the right side. I can just have my throttle there, and I was able to end up switching that up, but you guys, again, you'll see that later.
Sorry, battery went dead. It works perfectly, other than I need to figure out what I'm gonna do with all this. But yes, this thing works. I've never used hydro before, and I'm going to say now that I will never go back to cable again. You barely touch this, and it grips and locks on. Cable just feels like it's drag, finally stop. So I am digging this. Just need to figure out what I can do here. I believe this can be shortened. Just got to figure out, once I cut this part off, is there a flare in there, kind of like a brake line? Luckily I got a little bit of a car background, so if I just need to flare this thing, what would probably be kind of cool if I could do something out of brake line. So that would be neat, because then I could run it and make it a nice hard line. That would be cool, something I've never seen before. Don't know if it's possible, but let's give it a go. Other than I just need to finish welding the fork legs. Once that's done, this can all get broken down and then off to powder. So let's go.
I was finally able to go ahead and burn those fork brackets in because they just were tacked, luckily, because I had to move them around so many times. I didn't get real crazy with the tubes here. I didn't notch them at an angle. I went ahead and I left them straight. I think it was getting to the point in the project where, and I think most people get there, where you just want to be done because you've been working on it for so long that you start maybe cutting corners here and there. I don't feel like this was a big corner cut, but either way, normally I like to cut mine at an angle so that it matches the angle of the bracket. Oh well. Here I'm just taking some 16 gauge and I'm using a 1-inch round die that I had laying around so that I could cut these circles out, and this is what will cap off that fork. Yep, she's back from powder, and you guys didn't think I was going to let you just see the color right off rip, huh? I mean, I know, yes, you can fast forward to the end and watch it all, but I'd appreciate it if you just kind of hang out and watch. Now I did go in and powder coat pretty much everything right down to the pedals, which if you didn't know, Lawless pedals, you can take those apart and actually just go get the pedal part of it powder coated or painted or whatever you want to do to give it that a little extra touch, which I thought was pretty cool, and it was easy, went right back together again. the company, they make amazing parts, and you guys check them out. Like, if they're not cheap by any means, I know, but because of what you can get from China, but these are American made. This company, they're going to be around a long time if we keep supporting them. Here's one part of the build that I'm pretty excited about is the airbag seat. I didn't really get to test the airbag part of it out before because I didn't want to hook up the Schrader valve and then have to take all that apart because you can't get it out once it's in. So right now we're just bolting the seat up, and then we're going to go to the other side and bolt the airbag to the bracket, and then we can start adding the Schrader valve. And I did find I didn't leave myself a whole lot of room to do this, so what I would do was unbolt the seat, get that up as high as I could, and then turn it without scratching the frame. My first try, I aired up the seat, and when I came back, it didn't have any more air in it, so I'm assuming I didn't seal it well enough. But this time it worked. You just add the little Schrader valve to the front here, and then you can pump it up with a bike pump, and you're good to go. Alright, we're going to get the fender in. I'm going to try my best not to scratch everything. I had to play with it a little bit, finally got it in there. Only bolted the top, so if I ever run into an issue where I get a flat tire, I am able to maneuver some of this to get the wheel out without having to take everything apart. Just tightening everything up. Time to put the shifter cover on. Again, all of this is from Lawless. Here we're doing the brake lines, and like I said, I was able to run the lever to the other side using what I had laying around. I had to end up ordering a tool, however, in order to get all this to work. You could not do this by hand. The headlight, time to bolt that on, bolt it on. Super simple, super easy. These brackets are actually really cool, and I would definitely use them again. I think it's time to get this all buttoned up, get the other side of the tank put on, get everything finished, wired up. I did not tuck any of the wiring into the frame. I need to have access to this stuff, and I didn't want to void any warranties. So there are wires, I get it. I know people are going to say something, but it is what it is. I couldn't tuck it. Right here, guys, this is just a little gadget I picked up from LISEN Tech. It's a LISEN phone holder. You can get them off Amazon. I'm going to link them in the description below for you. I'm going to be able to hold my cell phone on here. My cell phone does link to the CYC motor, so I'm able to see my speed and all of the things that I need to do. You're actually able to tune the CYC motor through the app that they have, so I want to be able to have all of that right at my hands. Reason I picked this up right here. Again, link will be in the description below so you can get yourself one as well. Here, guys, this is where you're going to do all your connections. You just click the button, it actually reads, it's looking for that motor. I already went in there and ran my parameters. Here's where you're going to set your speeds. You have 1 through 3, so 1, 0 being nothing, 1 being a little bit, 3 giving it all the beans.
Do it for the build. Thank you so much for watching. As of right now, we finally hit 10K. I don't really know what that means, but we did it. Anyway, I don't have a name for this build, so if you want to comment and you've been watching this long, comment below and let me know a name. Give me some type of cool name and I will use it. I don't have anything to give you, but if you could want to do a name, that would be cool because I suck at it. Anyway, I'm going to go take it for a spin. It's actually really fun to ride. Had a few little quirks to work out, but they're good to go. We got a show in Tampa. Not really a show, it's Car Freaks Tampa on the 22nd of September. So if any of you are in Tampa, come out. It'll be out there. And either way, like, comment, subscribe. Maybe stay tuned for more when I get to it.